I'm going to ask everybody to introduce themselves. Let me just set the stage first. You have in front of you a packet, and you'll note that this is a joint meeting. We've framed it as a workshop. That means that there will be no public comment. This is not a public hearing. At the next meeting of the CAC, before any vote on the master plan, there will be public comment. So at this meeting, this is a time for the planning board members, housing partnership members, and the CAC to meet together to talk about the state hospital. So, another thing, there's 5 points on the agenda, and those are in no particular order. If people think there's a better order, they should tell me. They could have had bullets, they could have been in a different order. There's no priority listing here. If there's a more logical flow, somebody could let me know. But I'm going to start by asking everybody to go ahead and introduce both themselves and what board they're on. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that the master plan and permitting process was put at the end so that the housing partnership members could leave if they wanted to, because they don't necessarily need to be involved in that.
Okay. All right. Okay, so why don't you start? We'll go around this way.
Andy Guzon, I'm a member of the CAC.
Rod Platt, CAC.
Lynn Wallace, Housing Partnership.
I'm Jack Horner. I'm a member of the CAC, and I represent the Housing Partnership on the CAC.
Could we go back to Housing Partnership and CAC both have people who represent other groups? Could you just mention who you represent, Rod?
I'm from Western Mass Alliance for the Mentally Ill.
I'm Dave Modzaleski. I work for the Department of Mental Health. I'm on the CAC. I coordinate housing for the department.
Tex Moser, I'm also a representative of the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill of Western Mass.
I'm Harriet Diamond. I'm on the CAC as a neighborhood rep.
I'm David Narkowitz. I'm on the CAC as the City Council's rep.
I'm Gordon Shar, Housing Partnership.
Jennifer Derringer, Planning Board.
Ken Dogry, Planning Board.
Mark Sullivan, Planning Board.
George Cohout, Planning Board.
Wayne Feige, Planning Board.
Ellen Mish, Planning Office.
Stephen Gilson, Planning Board.
Courage Philippides, Mayor Higgins.
Maureen Kearney, City Council Representative on the Housing Partnership.
Charlie DeRose from the Northampton Development Corporation, is how we are at.
Richard Abusa from the Northampton Housing Partnership.
Ed Skrosky from the Northampton Development Corporation and the CAC.
Sammy Johnson on the Planning Board.
I'm David Drake, CAC and Historical Commission.
Terry Anderson, Economic Development, Mayor's Office.
Betsy Sears, Northampton Housing Partnership.
Bruce Fogel, I'm CAC and apropos of the chamber.
Okay. I think we have one more person coming in.
Introduce yourself.
Two more. We have seats here, but you're going to be in the middle of the slide projector when it gets turned on. Okay. So you can sit there, just know.
We've got room for another chair. We've got room over here for another chair.
And Keith, if you want to pull up a chair again somewhere. And hi, how are you?
Okay.
Good.
Jennifer?
Yep, we just have to find your spot. Pull up another chair. This is cozy. Oh, two more planning board members. Another CAC member. It is going to be very cozy.
No.
Somebody can, Mike, if you can get a chair, you can just park here in the corner. Oh, somebody else already has an idea. So we had a couple more people come in. Try it. They use the gavel again? Could the few people that came in a little bit late introduce themselves? We'll start with you.
Jamie Elbro Fisher of the Route 10 neighborhood.
Catherine Baker, the Planning Board.
Keith Wilson on the Planning Board.
Alan Mills, Housing Partnership.
Mike Rayburn, CAC.
Great. So, except for the number 5 on the list, are people comfortable just using the order that we have here? Or do you want to do a different order? Just we have any extras for, does Bruce need one, anybody else need one? Pass one down. That's a few extras. If I hear no dissent, I'm going to go with the order that we have. Kareem is bringing it.
I have to bring it to attorney.
Kareem to the rescue.
Who else?
Thank you. Mine was commandeered, and I've got to file a lawsuit for recovery.
You've been on time.
For your color.
That word is 40 years.
Really?
What did he say?
On time or?
No, reflect.
With a little soy sauce, it's wonderful.
Okay, so that is, the slide thing is a little bit problematic for me. Hi, Carolyn. But so let's start with affordability. So I don't know, Jack, do you want to help on this one? The original, yeah, just as shove the candy in the mouth.
Sure.
And Richard was around for this too. The original master plan called for a 50-50 mix of affordable and market rate housing. And so that was 50% affordable in some way, shape, or form, and 50% market rate, not determining what those price points were for the market rate. The developer has come in and asked for up to 100 new units, and the discussion has been, are we still on the 50-50 split there? Are we having another approach? Go ahead.
Well, and I wrote a bunch of questions which Terry has seen, and I don't know.
Do you want to just lay out some of the...
I don't know that I have
No. I just want to add, and anybody correct me if I'm wrong, but of the 50% affordable, the goal was to have 75% of the rental affordable and 25% of the home ownership affordable. So if you look over on Ice Pond Drive, for instance, that's 25% over there. If you look at the rental, it's 75%. So the developers kept to that, and that's been a good thing. Well, here are the questions that I wrote, because I'm the one who raised this a couple meetings ago. How was the original affordability ratio determined? What's the status of the units approved for phase 1 and phase 2? Having been built versus permitted? What's the inventory of affordable versus market? Has the DMH 15% requirement been met, or will the requirement apply to the additional 100 units? Will the original ratio apply for the 10% of units over the 207? In other words, the developer is allowed to develop 20 additional units without asking us for permission. What are Northampton's most pressing housing needs, market and affordable, which might be met by the additional units? What possibilities does the available land present? What is the definition of market rate affordable as it applies to Northampton? Does this phrase apply to both rental and home ownership? And finally, have multifamily units been considered? So that's a lot of questions, but they're what I think.
But can we just do some, the 50-50 did apply to the 20 over, as far as I can determine. We hadn't waived it, so it's good. Okay. And the 50-50 has been embedded in the since the RFP was developed, and the people who were here when the RFP was developed would agree that that was the case, because we saw affordability as a key consideration in terms of the housing up there. You had another question about multifamilies?
Just a question of, if they've been considered, because I don't think in the housing that I've seen, I don't think we've seen one. Have we?
How are you defining multifamily?
No, that's a good question.
I mean, there are apartment buildings there, and primarily the affordable housing is apartment buildings up there. But most of the apartments
and in the additional 100 units that are proposed, there are townhouses also that are attached multifamily buildings, but they're home ownership as opposed to apartments.
Okay. What the developer is proposing is 100 additional units. They're not saying necessarily those would be 50-50 affordable. What they are saying is they would like to develop some percentage of them. I think they were at 35, but I think they're saying the market would drive it. That would be what they're calling market rate affordable, what I would call starter homes, in a way, smaller homes. And I think, at least I've had some real interest in us thinking about that, given that there's a lot of people who don't necessarily qualify for what's called an affordable house, but need to buy a home and can't afford one in the market. In our market, there's a missing tier in our market, and they're thinking about trying to address that with smaller footprint homes. So that's a discussion I think we should think about.
Would they be deed restricted, like
No.
typical, so if you wanted
Not
to-
necessarily. They haven't talked about that. Yeah.
I wonder if we could just for a moment step back a little bit and make sure that everybody understands the big target in front of us is really a revision and amendment to the master plan. And these are the kind of details that can be put into the master plan. I wondered if somebody could kind of
Yeah, that's a
say that for
fair,
us.
you know what, that's a fair thing. I'm sorry, I thought people walked in knowing that, but
Yeah.
let me say it again. They've applied to allow for 100 more units at the state hospital. And what they're proposing is some of them they're not proposing any more apartment units. They're proposing some townhouse units, single-family units, and what they're calling bungalow units, which are smaller units. Those are the 3 housing types that they're proposing. And they've asked for up to 100 additional units on the site. That's why I was wondering whether or not this was the right order, because we might have gotten to that by looking at alternative plans first, but that's all right.
But to that point of mix, what they're asking for when they ask for a mix of bungalows, townhouses, and single family are 62 units. If you were to pull the single families out, that's the only way they can get to 100 units, given the acreage that they have. In other words, they have to either do townhouses or bungalows on the northernmost part of the campus.
Do you want to show that drawing, Wayne? Do you have that drawing?
They have to pull the single families out, which
Now we can borrow.
Do you know that for a fact?
You do the map they have today, which Terry has right there, and Wayne's going to put up. It's 62 additional units. To get to more than 62, they'd have to do more townhouses or more bungalows. And what they're saying is they'd like to go up to 100 because they don't want to have to go back to MEPA if they change the number. But
What do they come up with a plan where they can put the 100 units that they got?
we asked them to come back at the next meeting and talk to us about that.
That's what I want to know. I mean,
Right. But that's a different question than the affordability issue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
This one?
No, this one. So this one has bungalows on the far side.
In yellow.
In yellow. Their left, my right.
On the left?
My left, their right. Single-family homes on the upper portion. Townhouses in the center where the park is. More townhouses down across from the row of single-family houses that are already permanent. And a commercial and assisted living down on the front end. Did I get that all? So this is 62 more units, right? Is that the number? 62 more units. To get to 100, you'd have to change one of those housing types out. They're also proposing over on the other side where the beech trees are, up on the right, they're proposing a co-housing type development on that side. So that could be more dense if the people who want to live there want to make it more dense, right? Yeah.
I'd like to sort of put my housing partnership hat on and speak to this whole concept generally. And I have to say, you know, you folks have been in the trenches of this, you know, state hospital project. So I don't really know the details of it. I don't know how you get a right mix to have it sustainable. But in terms of the city's goal to deal with what is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do, which is to get affordable housing, I think you have to recognize that the Hospital Hill is a precious resource beyond belief in terms of what it represents to get affordable housing, especially in this situation where you're creating another bunch of units sort of out of whole cloth. So, you know, I would urge you and all of us as we think about conceptually how to do this, how do we get the biggest bang for the buck? How do we get the deepest affordability? And really, one of the things that we've always talked about as a housing partnership is, you know, not just that first bite of the apple, but how do we preserve it for successive affordable options? Because we all know what happens to the Northampton housing market if things go, you know, after the first purchaser. So, you know, as we try and make this thing work, I would encourage you to have the highest mix of the most deeply affordable, because that's the one that we struggle to create, and to have it have the longest term affordability that makes the whole project work.
Hearing that, going back to George's question and listening to your response, I come either as someone who only half paid attention or comes to a different conclusion, is that what the developer has come to us with is saying, we map this out in our current conceptual vision of how this would play out, would put 62 units in these different configurations, but I didn't understand there to be any guarantee that it would be so many bungalows and so many townhouses and so many single units and so many co-housing. And so I see that, you know, before we start assuming that it's this, that, and the other piece, we need to understand that I understood them to say, we have a picture that has 62 units, but if you give us permission to do 100, we won't have to go through the waterfall of different steps each time we come back to differentiate it. But I didn't understand that the bungalows had to be there other than the, was it 40B, 40A?
40R.
Or 40R.
But
Some
the
alphabet.
bungalows are outside of the 40R.
Right, and so that they have different pieces to it, and then my component is that to look at that as if that's their proposal is going to lose some piece of what it is that I think we're looking for. And then speaking to Richard's point about the commitment to affordability, I think we wind up in a position where, you know, this design seems to create these neighborhoods or enclaves or spaces that are going to be more single purpose, and the risk I fear of creating that affordability, you know, once we get to a definition that we can all embrace, is that if we skip over the demand or the necessity of a mix that makes it more village-like, more neighborhood-like, I don't want to lose sight of that in terms of the bungalows here and the townhouses there and the residential there. So I'm concerned about thinking that this is it. I'm concerned about the number, and I'm concerned about trying to get a blend or a mix relative to affordable, market affordable, and whatever other definitions we agree upon as a starting point.
Just as a note, I think that the developers have followed what we've told them that we want them to do in terms of affordability, really to the letter. So
right, well,
I think if we change that, they're going to go with it, including if we said we want so-called market rate affordable there. I think they would. Yeah.
Bruce, I think your point is a good one. They're all good. This is a classic example of why a picture is worth 1,000 words, because we look at the picture and we get it in our head and we think that's the plan. And if you've been involved in this project, you know, the picture keeps changing. But going back to the original RFP and the original master plan, you know, what was in it were percentages. And we didn't say to the developer, you know, do exactly this kind of housing. We said, you know, it's got to be 50% affordable, and of the rental development, 75% has got to be affordable, and of the home ownership, 25% has got to be affordable. And we didn't say what size houses they were supposed to be or what size apartments, right? So it may be that that would be a useful approach for us to take here, would be to look at the 100 units and say, well, and of course the CAC could say, well, geez, we don't want as many as 100. That's another issue. But let's say we said we wanted 100. It may be that a useful approach would be not to say we want so many bungalows or so many townhouses, but simply we want an X percentage of affordability, and out of that, we want an X percentage for rental and an X percentage for home ownership. And then the other thing I would say is that I think Richard's point about long-term affordability, which is something we've always talked about on the Housing Partnership, is an important one. There are, for instance, 4 home ownership houses over on Ice Pond Drive, but those are deed restricted. They can't be sold by the current owners at the market price. They have a 99-year affordability restriction. And so if you really want to create permanent, or as close as we can get to a permanent affordable housing, we've got to say to the developer, we want some deed restricted housing. If you start with market rate affordability units, such as those, let's say they're bungalows, but you say to the first owner, you know, we're going to build something that's going to make it too expensive for you to get into it, but by the way, when you want to sell it, you can sell it for whatever you want. It's sort of an entry-level home for one owner, and it doesn't go any further. And that's one of the things that makes this a knotty issue.
I have to say, living in an 820 square foot house My house is restricted in its value by the size of my home. I mean, I really, I think part of the reason to think about different size of houses is to build the affordability in that it'll carry on, because I'm maxed out as what I could sell my house for just by the size of the home, you know. So just
I don't know so much about the market rate affordable homes.
I think we need to talk about that some more.
I agree.
Alan, and then
having been on housing partnership for a couple of years now, I can tell you that there have been examples in the past. I also want to speak, I think Richard very clearly brought up the issue of the longevity, because there have been initiatives in the past that have started out being affordable, but because the restrictions either do not exist on transferability, or if they do, they either expire or haven't for one reason or another been enforced, those homes are slipping out of the affordable inventory into market value. And so what happens is each one of those units costs the city an affordable place for a middle class, or slightly less than middle class person to live.
The units that have been built up to now, has there been any restriction on, do they just roll over and become unaffordable units after the first owner?
At Ice Pond, there's a deed restriction on sale.
And how does that work?
They are capped at how much equity they can take out when they sell the house.
Okay.
And so that's true on those private single-family homes. And on the apartments that have been built, they're all tax credit apartments, so they're tied up for as long as we possibly can tie them up with the state funding sources. Okay, so, and actually much more affordable housing has been built to date at the state hospital than market rate housing.
Right.
Just as a practical matter. Do you want to speak to that at all in terms of the tax credit stuff? No. Okay. No.
We just as some history. You know, we worked hard to get to that 207 number. I think we did. I don't think we pulled that out of our hat. And you know, this is a 50% increase. I think dramatic. This is 9 years after the original master plan was proposed. We have made a commitment along the way, because mass development is not the only developer. Jonathan Wright is a developer. He's building single-family homes up there at market rate. I mean, in other words, he's selling homes between $600,000 and $700,000. We gave him that right to do that. We gave him the permit to do that without having any idea of what that upper campus is going to be, what the northernmost part of the campus was going to be. Now, if that turns into townhouses and bungalows, he has the only single-family homes other than the bungalows. He has the only single-family homes, and he is way out of market with the rest of that property. Now, maybe we took a leapfrog when we gave him the permit, but we were all very impressed with the LEED certification. We were all very impressed with the way he was building the homes, was going to build them, how he was going to market them, and including the townhouses. I don't know if we don't owe him some consideration in this by at least making sure that there are some single-family homes that are being built. And by the way, square footage will have a big part of whether a single-family home is affordable or not. A 1,200 square foot bungalow will be a lot cheaper than a 2,600 square foot two-story neo-Victorian. But anyway, I just think that we can't forget the history and how we got here, and that mass development isn't the only developer. That we have a developer on site who is in the process of building homes, has made a sizable investment and a sizable commitment, and I think they need to know at some point what the environment, the housing environment is going to look like up there, so they can market and sell those homes that they're building, that they're investing in.
Steve, and then Wayne.
I'm also curious about where the number of the 100 or 120 new units. I'm looking at the sheet ahead. It's talking about 327 units. So I wasn't quite sure.
Go to,
it says the estimate from current estimate of November 2008, total of 327 units.
you go to the page before that.
I'm just comparing above the word 207, if it's 100, I don't want to get hung up on the number. I was curious where that number came from, because that was mass development coming and saying, look, we want to do this.
They'd originally been able to do 207, and then they were able to do 10% over the allowed, so that was 227.
Yep.
And they've come forward and said, we'd like to be able to do up to.
Right, but wasn't the CAC saying, hey,
No,
you
but,
think you can do 100 more units?
no, but I would like to frame this in the context of the Sustainable Northampton Plan, where we asked, we did a mail, we sent something out in the census and asked people if we were to do more density, where would you like to see it? People said the state hospital. When we did the discussions around Sustainable Northampton, that's where people said they wanted density. So it was in that context that I think that they came forward as well.
Well, along those lines, I mean, back to the affordability. Looking at the numbers on that page also, which is projecting 70 to 73 students, and the cost of the schools of $581 to $600,000. I'm not quite sure. I always thought we estimated about $10,000 per child.
I did apples to apples because I took the appropriations
Oh, you
budget
can see how you did it. You
and
divided
divided it by the number of students.
Right, but I think it's the other. Even if you look at the tax revenue, of about $1 million, a little over $1,077,000 for the projected, and then $600,000 to high for the cost of educating the students. The city, the school budget is only less than half of what the city budget is. So if you double the cost of the students to get kind of an accurate picture of what it's going to cost the city in terms of to provide the services up there, the city it's going to cost the city $200,000 above what we're getting in taxes for that area in order to provide the services. So I'm using your kind of simple.
This number is with the 327, and you're saying if we got double the number of students?
No, I'm saying that if you take the cost, you're projecting the cost of students from around $581,000 to $600,000.
Right.
The school budget's about half of the city budget. So just using a simple metric of doubling what it costs for the school.
I see what you're saying.
It's going to be about a $1.2 million cost to the city to provide all the services at the hospital.
I don't think that's true, and here's why. Because we're not going to hire more police officers to police that. We're not going to add more firefighters because it's in the core of the city. So really, the biggest cost is on the DPW side. I had a conversation again with the DPW director today. If we added a crew, he'd be thrilled. That's about $120,000.
Right. What concerns me was when we get into the conversations about percentage of affordability, I think we really have to look at these numbers where the cost to educate the children who are going to be living up there and the cost to the city. And for a city, as you know, which we struggle with our budget every year, we have to make sure that the city can afford whatever we build up there.
I do think that the non-school costs are much
I
less.
guess I'd like to see that.
Well, I can tell you right now, we wouldn't hire any more police officers to patrol that. We just wouldn't. It's within the downtown radius, and we wouldn't do it. And we've also had conversations around the fire side of things. We wouldn't add any more firefighters to do that area. If things are developed on the outside of the city, outskirts of the city, it creates that pressure. But our response time to the state hospital is the same as our response time to Smith College. It's not any different. We don't have to add any more people to get that response time. The DPW pressure is there. I agree with you on that.
Well, I will slightly disagree with you. I think the calculations you did per student are below.
Well, I would have used a higher number, except I was trying to do apples to the numbers we used before. But even if you use a slightly higher number, we're still under the number, and we haven't put the commercial taxes in at all. This is only the residential taxes. We don't have the commercial taxes.
But they are listed, you can see it's another $500,000.
This is just the residential taxes. So, and the other thing that was really interesting, because I talked to the bus transportation coordinator in the school today. The kids are coming from, if you look at where kids are coming from there, they're not coming from the affordable units. They're coming from the market rate units at Ice Pond. We're picking up very few kids at the affordable units. We're picking up lots of kids at the Ice Pond. It almost makes an argument for more affordable small units. I'm not saying that we should do that, but it's very interesting to me. We're picking up 4 kids on the main campus out of how many units there are there now? 33 units? And we have 26 units at Ice Pond, and we're picking up 19 kids.
Well, I guess that just comes down to my concern when we do discuss how much can the city afford?
I agree with you.
That is really important.
I'm just not sure affordability is one of the metrics because of the numbers that can come in.
Right, but if they're housing up there, the DPW is gonna be going up there anyway, so that cost differential for these extra units wouldn't change
It
dramatically.
would help us offset the
Right.
cost of the DPW.
If they're
That's
gonna
the
be
point.
done right.
Yeah.
And as long as I commandeer the floor
Yeah,
relative
which
to
you
this.
have, and Wayne actually was next.
Okay, he's better looking, huh?
I'd like to get back to the issue of the mix of affordability. So two issues I want to point out. One is, one of the concerns I have is the mix. Right now we have sort of, these are the apartments that are either online or about to come online, that are 75% more or less affordable. As Richard said, we're aiming at the lowest we can justify them getting to, so these are aimed at 60% of area median income. And then you have, as Danny was talking about, these very high-end single-family homes. So we've done a good job of getting both extreme ends of the market. You know, very high-end here, at least 75% of these are the lowest, the low end that we can do. What we don't really have is anything in the middle. And so that's where this discussion came from about sort of smaller units. Yes, if there's not deed restrictions, the unit prices will certainly go up. But if you think about the best model we have in Northampton now, is almost all the housing between Florence Road, Birds Pit Road, and Ryan Road. Vast majority of housing was developed in the 1950s, Veterans Home Administration, Farmers Home Administration, and HUD housing. And some of that housing is appreciated, but it is still outside of Laurel Park and outside of some condos in town. It's still sort of the most affordable solid housing in town. So even without deed restrictions, there's a limit to how far they can go. And certainly these here in particular, if the lots are very limited, there's not a lot of opportunity to improve. Because someone can obviously upgrade a kitchen and add whatever upgrade a kitchen adds to the unit, but this will never be a 4,000 square foot house or even a 2,000 square foot.
I talked to a lot of people in Northampton who live in subsidized housing who say to me, I want to buy. I would like to be able to save some money and buy in Northampton. And there's no way they're going to be able to do it. They know that. You go from subsidized housing to really high end.
And the risk of affordable units, the risk of the deed restriction, is we're basically saying poor people can never build equity the way until last year we all did in our homes.
Could I, for the record, just repeat a question I had raised before, which is the allocation of 15% DMH, which is statutory, not part of our master plan. And does anybody, perhaps you could comment on that, how are they going to be distributed so there isn't a little concentration of those clients?
Well, it does raise the question of affordability as well. For clients of the department and any very poor subpopulation, we need deep subsidies in order to make those housing units affordable. And by a deep subsidy, we mean some other source even beyond the tax credit source in order for very poor individuals to afford the rent that's required to be paid even on a tax credit property. We have fulfilled, the developers have fulfilled, and worked closely with the department to meet their obligation on the 15%. To now, it does raise the question of more units, and it is indeed statutory. I think that one could argue that there's a continued 15% requirement.
I would agree with
Beyond
the extent to the
because when the 15% was put in place, we had no idea how many units were going to be built.
That's right.
Right.
There must be 15%.
So, but the issue of affordability is an important one to discuss because there's affordable units and then there are affordable units. And to talk about affordable units for very poor, low-income individuals, we need to find ways in which to make those units even more affordable than the existing programs that are now in place, which is what we had to do in order to fulfill the obligations.
David, does your department actually allocate these 15% units? It says they have to be your clients.
They have to be our clients. We have to work with the administering agency for the Section 8 program because these are Section 8 units, and there are wait lists and a rather particular way in which folks have to apply and get on a list and become qualified, but to date, we've been able to work that out well with the regional housing entity that's administering these subsidies, and I don't think it's presented a particular problem or difficulty for us. But without the benefit of a deep rental subsidy, very low income individuals or families would not be able to live even in the so-called affordable tax credit rental units.
Do you know how many clients there are now in the project?
There are 7 in the first phase, and there'll be 8 in the second phase in the rental units. There are no home ownership units. And we had asked specifically when we worked with the developers, it was our desire at the time to have them set aside for us 1-bedroom apartments, because that was the housing type of choice for the folks that we're working with. The vast majority of clients in the Department of Mental Health are single adult individuals.
At one time, Dave, and Tex might remember this, we did talk about the developers having the option of meeting the obligation
Off-site, that's right.
Because the feeling being that some people might not want to live there, and they might want to live somewhere else. So I don't think that...
And that door, I think, remains open.
It remains open.
For consideration.
And also part of the discussion was that the ownership by the Northampton Housing Authority, when if they get around to building on their portions, could also be part of meeting the goals of 15%. I think that was part of our discussion, as I recall.
Well, this may be too simple, but to move this along, I wondered if the members of the CAC could consider, if and when you decide to allow the developer more units, somewhere between whatever 0 and 100, could we just move that ratio that Jack described earlier along with the number of units that are being
50%.
The 50-50?
Not the 50-50, but I think the larger breakdown, 15% mental health, home ownership, the ratio that existed in the first master plan. And that we seem to be moving along now.
The 15% was something that we inherited with the statute in 1994. So that's embedded.
Right.
It's not,
right.
That has nothing to do with the CAC. It has to do with Dave and the ability to find housing in District 1, basically, or closer.
And it becomes part of the affordable
That's right,
package.
those units are part of the larger affordable.
Could we go back to sort of some other key questions before we jump into numbers? I mean, what do people think about this idea of starter home? What do people think? Do we think it's a good thing? Do we think it's a bad thing? Yeah.
Well, I think starter homes are a great part of the mix of affordability options. I mean, one of the things we've always talked about is having the full range. I think the question that really we might be struggling on this is, do we need, it's hard to predict 25 years down the road what our housing snapshot's going to look like, and that's why I would argue for some sort of permanent affordability. We have talked in the partnership about this reality that home ownership is the way that most people build equity and get a stake in the American dream, and there are sort of hybrid models where you have some measure of affordability but also allow some measure of equity draw out, and so that you can have the best of both worlds and permit people to get equity but not necessarily permit them to excessively profit when the market gets exaggerated. So I again would say home ownership is great and a need and part of our mix, but if there's a way to do permanent affordability, I think it's desirable.
I think this, I like the idea of the starter home. I think that what's, to go back, I wish we had the people from Mass Development here right now, because to go back to what they were proposing, I think everything they were proposing 2 weeks ago was home ownership. I don't think they were proposing any rental units at all. So that's going to, that confounds the issue even more of affordability, access to the clients of the Department of Mental Health.
Well, what about all the Ford crossing, some of that?
No, I don't think it does. I mean, I think they know they have to deal with the 15%, so it's on them to figure out how they're gonna do that. I think that's the way you have to play it. Wherever they do it, they do it. They need to meet the 15%. It's open to them to deal with it off-site if they want to deal with it off-site. I don't think we have to worry about that. Let them deal with it.
But it does go back to what Jack said, how 75% of the rental was affordable and 25% of the home ownership was affordable. We're now talking about all
Right, I'm saying,
units that they're proposing now are home.
I'm trying to get us to, is there any consensus about some basic ideas? For instance, the idea of starter homes.
I think starter homes sound like a great idea, but I would like to hear what the argument is for exactly how affordable works in terms of it after it's sold, how it continues to be affordable, and what that means, and what's the argument for that versus starter homes? I mean, I'm not quite sure.
Somebody want to speak to the deed restriction issue? Yeah.
Well, are you asking how the deed restriction works?
Just very quickly.
Well, I mean, basically the affordability requirement, is attached to the deed. So you can't have, a sale of the home, without conforming to the deed.
And the deed says basically what?
Actually, there's usually a formula that says that you can sell it for some appreciated amount based on CPI and something else, right?
Yeah, I want to say that I think there's a difference between the starter home
I agree.
and one of these deed restricted homes. The deed restricted home is not a starter home because, I would argue, because you can't build equity. You can't, there's no gain. You end up when you sell it, selling it as an affordable home, which is not a bad thing. I'm not criticizing, but let's not call those starter homes because you gotta make it a nest egg if you're gonna buy a larger home. But I like the mayor that you pointed out is that you can create homes, these bungalows, that are by their very nature, but it always going to be affordable starter homes simply because of the small footprint and the small lot size. And that will buy, and they're market rate, but they're always going to be available as part of the housing stock, very small housing stock in Northampton of nice looking starter homes that will always be a place for somebody to move up. So we can have people flowing up through into bigger homes while staying in Northampton instead of having to start in East Hampton or start in Westfield or something like that. So I'm in favor of the starter home idea.
The real question, I think, and I don't know how we can find an answer to it, is, are you right, and is the mayor right, when she says that if a home is only a certain size, that kind of by definition, it's always going to be affordable to a certain extent. And that's the question I think that I need to know more about. Let me say a quick question. The home, if I said the homes on Ice Pond Drive were starter homes, I didn't mean to.
Let me trigger both. So
what we have on Ice Pond Drive are, I think, 24 homes, which are basically identical in size, but 4 of them are subsidized so that they're affordable to a certain level. And the advantage is that you can't drive around the neighborhood and say, well, gosh, these are where the affordable people live. Their homes look just like everybody else's. And that's, and so the advantage to the homeowners there, it's true they can't build their equity, but they get to live in a pretty nice house for less money than other folks do. That's the trade-off.
And I guess I'm arguing that all of those choices should be available.
Can I clarify one thing about this? Okay. I agree that starter homes and deed restricted homes are not identical, but in any kind of housing, you get the benefit of your mortgage pay down, which is a built-in saving as opposed to going to rent. And you also get the tax savings, and you also recoup any improvements so that you can invest in your home that way. And that all, there's generally in the formula an ability for you to recoup the value of that. So there is an ability to make those real solid, you feel like you own it, live in it investments.
Question to Richard, in that deed restriction situation, there is some upside, it's just capped in proportion to some sort of a formula.
I'm sorry, I'm not licensed to practice law on this.
Well, no, but that's the way it works, right?
Yes.
So there is some upside to it.
So the value of the home as an affordable home after it's sold does move up.
In relation to the market.
In relation to the
And
market.
there may be a restriction on who that home can be sold to, in terms of the income of the family that's going to
Right.
buy it.
There's usually somebody who holds, who has they have to try to market it first to somebody who's eligible. Then there's usually an out if they can't find somebody they can market it to anybody. Yeah.
I just wonder if there's an expert on the Dudley Street Initiative in the room. So I've had just a brief exposure to it, and they use this kind of a mechanism to limit the amount of equity that people can take home with them, but they're given a chance to buy into Roxbury and very close to downtown, and they maintain cultural economic diversity in this community.
I'm pretty familiar with the Dudley Street Initiative, and I think they're dealing in a housing market that's in some ways similar to ours, but we have a lot of deed restricted, we have more deed restricted housing in Northampton than people realize. You know, we do have projects throughout the city that are deed restricted. I just want to lay out some numbers here. 100 affordable units at the site now. It's going to be 100 affordable units, deeply affordable. 100 market rate. Nothing in the middle. That's the concern I have with this development. When people say they want a neighborhood, I don't think it's going to be a neighborhood unless we figure out the middle. That's what I worry about. Okay, and I'm not. I agree that you know, the deed restriction is a reasonable tool in some places in the city. We already have done 100 affordable units there. We're doing houses for sale that are deed restricted. I'm saying, is there a model for the? What do we do about the middle? What do we do about those families that want to stay here? You know, that can't afford to stay here and don't make little enough to get a deed restricted home. You know, that's the group I'm worried about.
I agree with that. In the absence of a housing plan for the city, the housing partnership did a casual telephone survey of people and found that the most, and please correct me if I'm missing something, but found that the most needed were single SROs and also affordable, you know, low-income housing for people who live in the city and can't afford to buy a house.
Home ownership.
Home ownership, yeah. And also that it turns out that the national statistic, I think, is that the most houses that are being sold to single people.
That's right.
It's a demographic that's happening. We don't know how long that's going to last, but that's there. Yeah. And I also want to say, I'm sorry, I agree with you about that a house that, what did you call it, that's
little?
A little house.
That's what I call my house.
Because I have one too, and it's never going to be worth a heck of a lot of money, so by definition, empirically, it's going to remain affordable.
But it is relative.
Relatively affordable.
To everything else, yeah.
It is relative.
It's a relative issue.
I don't think that's
somebody
true.
Here and then here. Yeah.
I guess the question I've raised is how do you ensure that it's truly people who need that housing is going to buy it? Because if it's a $200,000 home, just run a number out, and it's 900 square feet, and I'm a single guy, even though I'm earning $500,000 a year, what would stop me buying that house? You know, how
it's an imperfect.
Well, I'm just wondering, is there a mechanism that you can ensure that that doesn't happen?
I don't know if we can. No grant accounting. That's what we do.
But you've made, you know, there's different people out there who just want simple things, even though they can.
I would not be surprised if there were small footprint houses there that retirees bought them, that single people bought them, that a mother and a child or a father and a child would buy them. And we could be a mix of people. That's okay with me.
Well, you know, I like the idea of the small homes, definitely. But I also think that some of them we should continue to make some percentage of, if we do choose to have 100 more homes, some percentage should be affordable, because it actually isn't true that a small home won't gain an outrageous amount of value. If you go to any city like, you know, San Francisco, I mean, a small home can cost $3 million. It just depends on what the market in Northampton does. So this city could become expensive enough for a small home to be unaffordable for just the common starting family. So I think we should preserve some percentage, I'm not saying it should be 50%, but some percentage of these homes should be affordable, even if they're starters.
Well, just before we go on to the next phase of a possible 100 homes, I was just having a little sidebar with Wayne here. There are still 105 residential units to be built. Everybody understands those are already planned out to be a certain style. Could you explain that to me again, or someone? What kinds of homes are they going to be?
We don't know.
Those are
We
the
don't know.
bungalows. The bungalow neighborhood is the next phase of, under the current map, it's the next phase of housing.
Under the current master plan, and are those,
And the townhouses.
and are the bungalows what you're considering to be small? So then some of that need will be met by the 100 homes that are under the current master plan.
Well, actually, I mean, that's a discussion that, it's interesting, the developer has been saying they'd like to try bungalows next. We haven't really had that conversation. They're saying they'd like to do the bungalows next. We approved the road, we approved the concept of that road over there to do that. But that's relatively recent, and I think well, I agree with Harriet that, a small house can cost, depends on the market. I think they're seeing a real need in this market when they start talking to people for the smaller homes. Yeah.
I mean, I think certainly the hope is to do these units that fit as that market we're talking about. But if the CAC said, no, we're capping this, we're not going to do the additional 100 units, they're going to look at selling these for a lot more. They started doing that, taking this part of the phase and mixing it in. That's not necessarily what they would do if this is the end of the project. That's not necessarily what they would do.
I think they move, and
Would you say that a little louder?
Yeah, I mean, the issue is, they're going to be planning, hoping that the CAC approves this addition of 100 units. And so this master plan you see is based on that assumption that you all approve it. If the CAC says no, the number isn't changing at all. Obviously, there's a middle ground. If the CAC said no, the number's sticking at the 227, where it is now. Then they're obviously going to re-examine their options for going over.
Which is most likely the bungalows go away.
If bungalows go away, or whoever else was talking about this, you can't have small houses with a lot more value. You could still do bungalows, but aim for a very,
give them a larger lot.
Larger lot, granite tops instead of
expansion and all.
Right.
But I think they have to make the money back that they've sunk in the project, so they're going to try to tell them for whatever. Catherine's had her hand up and hasn't spoken yet.
Yeah, I was just wondering, the percentages make a lot of sense to me. I guess what I'm wondering is where they're all placed, because when they're in these, these little neighborhoods of all bungalows or neighborhoods of all single-family homes, it doesn't have this feel of village mix that I thought was one of the goals of the development of the.
I'm going to have to disagree with that too. I mean, if you sit on the porch of one of those houses that just sold for $600,000, you're looking at the tax credit units. Your front porch opens up to the tax credit units. If you're at the bungalows, you're going to be looking at the tax credit. I mean, and it's not that big. We don't have that slide that shows the walking rate distances, do we? I mean, everything is less than 5 minutes apart. You're not that far away from anything. And I go back to my own frame of reference. I live across the street from the Gianfreda. How much did those houses go for on Coles Meadow Road? $600,000 or $700,000. They're right across the street. So I don't see it as, we're the little ghetto on this side of the street, and the rich people live up the hill. We go walking through their neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, we're really talking, this is just a.
Yeah, although it is a ghetto, is that what you said?
No, I said dangerous.
What?
I said danger.
Dangerous. They've only asked me to come and clean the house once.
This is a visually conceptual plan. It's not exactly, we're really talking percentages here, not exactly what everyone.
I think they're saying, what if the market said that they could move the bungalows up the hill or over by where we said the co-housing would be, and then they do this. They're looking at what they can. We're talking about the big questions. Okay.
And we have, to the advantage of the site, there are no railroad tracks.
Correct, so nobody can be on the wrong side of
That's right.
it. It's a really good thing. Yeah.
I'm struggling to figure out exactly where to bring this in, but wearing my transportation hat, one of my concerns is that one of the attractions of this with the sustainability plan is to have the density there, that we encourage public transportation and walking and bicycling and stuff like that. And the question that keeps popping in my head as we talk about affordability is the 100 units, is that the maximum number? Because presumably the higher density up there, the more attractive public transportation, the more routes they can sustain and stuff like that. And I know the number of units sets of red flags with traffic generation and stuff like that, but there's going to be a tipping point where you're going to start reducing trips because of zip car or public transportation. I don't know if they've looked at that density in relation to those facts and where that may fall in affordability.
I think we're going to look at the Notre Dame plans later. I think they do an additional, well, we haven't been able to figure out what's additional. They've got close to another 100 more, I think.
I'm just curious if the numbers we're talking about now, if that's an adequate density to support a decent public transportation system and stuff like that.
It's the same, I mean, we did look at slides that overlaid the other neighborhoods in the city and we compared them to this neighborhood, and the density here with this drawing is similar to the density on Elm Street and the density in Florence, right? Isn't that what we looked at?
That's exactly.
So, I mean, I think...
But does that make for a good public transportation?
Well, you know, I mean, any neighborhood, we've got all of the existing neighborhoods, and to what extent do they rely on public transportation now?
Yeah, Jack and then Harry.
I just say really quickly, as a reminder about the power of a drawing, one of the things that's been a little curious to me is that Mass Development's come in with this request for 100 additional units, but the drawing they've given us has 62 units, which is 2/3, right? So I think everyone on the room will ought to ask ourselves, we know where, or we can have it explained to us again, where the existing, under construction and permitted units are or will be. But, you know, right now there's a bunch of single-family homes, you know, up in the North Park. But if you're going to add another 38 homes, you know, I don't see how you can have as many single-family homes.
They'd be
I
smaller
remember
units.
early on, they showed, in one of the first slide presentations, they showed several different scenarios of how they could potentially get to that 100 units. So, you know, I think what we talked about at the last CAC meeting is actually having them include those scenarios in the conceptual design plans. So you can see what the potential variations might be.
Wayne has to stay in the middle. Yeah, I mean, you're right, you're right. I think Harriet was next, then we're back over to
No, go
Maureen.
ahead. My question was in.
Maureen.
I just had a question about what are the features, what are we considering the features of these starter homes, size,
I think that this, I don't think they've set a price point, although I think they're trying to figure that out. For evaluation's sake, I think they use 300, but we're trying to get them down from that. But we need to come to some kind of evaluation.
we're talking about under 1,000 square feet?
They've had conversations anywhere from 900 to 1,200.
This is one of the alternatives. This still doesn't get that full gap, but this is replacing the single-family homes here with another bungalow. So the idea is that this bungalow worked, then trying here, and I don't know what the number is. It's less than, it's closer to the full number.
Oh, sure, it's more than the 62 and less
It's
than
more.
100.
Correct.
Yeah, I think part of their reason for saying 100 was because you have to go through the MEPA process. And if you, let's say they said they wanted to do 62, and then the market really was great for the bungalows and they wanted to do more, they'd have to go through another MEPA permitting process. If you go to MEPA with 100, then you can do anything under 100 and not have to go back. And it also lets the neighborhood comment on the worst possible scenario at that point, as opposed to having to come back. So I don't fault, I mean, I think that's fine to say, here's the maximum we want to do, and have people respond to the maximum. Yeah.
Could someone remind, what's driving this revision now? Is it just as Wayne described, they don't want to go forward with building the next 100 until they have a guarantee of 200? What's driving this right now, this revision of the master plan?
I think there's a couple of things. One is that you have a developer starting to develop housing and people wanting to know what's going to be happening on the rest of the campus.
The Jonathan Wright thing that
Right.
Dan was
And
speaking
people
of.
wanting to have a vision of the rest of the campus. Them starting to build another section and also wanting to know what the final plan is going to look like. And also getting better handle on what the numbers are in terms of making the whole project work. We've asked them to do a lot of work as a part of making this campus, bike paths, walking trails, et cetera. Those costs have to be covered. They're trying to figure that out.
And I think the other thing was actually, the planning board voted to recommend additional units to State Hospital, and that's reflected in the Sustainable Northampton. So that's the other part of this process, is Sustainable Northampton says 2 more units up there, planning board recommended.
We recommended this 4-yard designation, that this would be a place in the city.
No, we talked about, in
Initial.
addition to what they also was a good place to provide additional units for density.
It's called out in the Sustainable Northampton plan.
You must have missed that.
So I think it's a combination of all those things, George. A combination of all those things. I do think that we need to make a decision about what that looks like, so somebody can go ahead and do something. Because to be able to sell it, people want to know what the neighborhood is they're going to move into. They want to have some sense of it.
Which, you know, brings it full circle back to the concept of the theory of affordability versus the reality of the market and the market absorption. And, you know, all the theory about 50% here and 75% there, and you know, is tough to manage. And I think whether it's Jonathan Wright or the next phase of development or their attempt to have this whole thing absorbed is the issue of, you know, is what it's going to look like. And I understood that the 100 up to 100 extra was an outgrowth of the infill and the sustainable Northampton and all of that piece, which helped me overcome one of my other historical points that I was going to make relative to Dan, relative to the ratio between commercial space and residential space and that absorption. But I wasn't yet, but I figured I was going to bring that up under job creation. So I'm at a point where, you know, the goal of affordability balanced by the market in terms of understanding it, to me is the challenge that we collectively have to make and address. And I continue to share Catherine's point about the fact that that group of bungalows has got the likelihood of becoming a ghetto. And in terms of, pick a bad word, enclave, you know, I don't care what verbiage you use. It's just that I see it as more of a mix. And as a Forbes Avenue native here in Northampton, and you know, one of the 3 or 5 hamsters on this committee, in this august body, you know, the mix of housing spread out through a development, through a village, all those density pictures comparing this road to the main street in Florence and this road to the Kensington, Washington, Harrison Avenue piece, you know, there is a mix. And to have it all be in one area or another, even though that's a conceptual piece, will always be a real problem for me. And I think you can mix it around and have a far better piece of how it's going to be absorbed. And so, notwithstanding our differential enclaves, I have a real problem with that.
Yeah.
Well, it just seems like all we're really talking about is the number of units and the mix of affordable versus market rate. And it seems like from our conversations here that even though we've got a plan up there, so is a bungalow enclave or ghetto or whatever we're calling it, that may not be the
district.
That may not be the reality unless the CAC puts that as a condition of their approval. It sounds like that there could well be a mixture of bungalows and single families or whatever mixed in, depending on what the market or whatever the future is driving. Or is that something you want to button down now as part of your approval?
This is have a wide open discussion to help inform the CAC and the other boards.
Yeah. It just seems to me that all we're talking about is the number of units and then
I'm aware that it's 10 after 8 and we're still on topic number 1.
One follow-up point is that I'm somewhat concerned, apropos of another concern is the clarity that Jack has shared relative to the 50-50 being morphed into the 75 on rental and the 25 on single family, and so I don't know how that formula is going to be maintained relative to.
I think the CAC is going to have some discussion about that, but I want to go back to this key question. On the first 200 or so units, we have a 50-50. So we have 100, exactly 110 affordable, 110 market, or, you know, 113 and a half market, 113 and a half affordable, right? So we have that next. We're talking about the next 100. I want to kind of get the threshold question on people. Do people feel that that 50-50 ratio has to carry through that next 100? That's the first question.
Well, can I show some of that? When the planning board has projects where they're asking for a waiver and we kick in the affordability, I think we go with 11% or whatever it is, whatever the threshold is. I'll just throw that out there.
Well, this project, if you didn't have it.
No, but I'm just saying for the additional 100 units, if we're looking as a starting point, I'll just say throw out the 11%.
That's something we could think about. But this is in a project that's already 50%.
No, I understand that. I'm just throwing that out as an idea.
What would be the ideal overall percentage of affordable units in Northampton?
We're at close to 11%, we're at 11% now. I mean, our goal has been to stay ahead of the state's 10%, so that the planning board actually gets to
from that aspect,
have a permit granting authority, right?
From that aspect, 50% sounds like a lot, and it might be desirable to cut that down to have it be well over the 10 or 11%.
If you were to say no ratio on the next 100, you'd still be at 33% affordable for this project. That's the math.
Yeah, I'm just trying to.
I hear what you're saying. That's a good point.
If this was at 50% for the entire projected project of 337 units, that would be equivalent to, with the 8,000, potentially 8,000 housing units in Northampton, that would be 2%. 2% of our affordable housing would be on this campus. 2% of that. So 20% of what's required by 40B would be on this campus.
Is it required that the builders complete the 227 units prior to beginning any of the subsequent units? Or would they be able to say, well, we'll skip 100 or 75 of the presently permitted ones that are under that affordability rule if the next bunch are not covered by it?
That's a good point. We need to build that in. Correct.
I was going to say, I would hope that you, in planning this, do not try to be governed by the idea of how do we keep ahead of the permitting requirement. The thing that needs to drive you is how many affordable units do you need to keep the city viable for a variety of citizens.
Which brings me to the next question, which is, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I had one more point. The other thing to recognize is, while this is a master plan, as elements of it get built, like the big houses that Wright's built, you are in effect, to some degree, defining the affordable houses that will be built in the future. Because they need to be built by the developer, and as you have, it seems to me. Anyway, I suggest that.
Okay. Yeah, Wayne, you got something?
Yeah, just relating to that, I mean, one of the discussions we've had at some boards that have some partnerships, had some discussion on this, is one of the benefits of staying above 10% was there would be more flexibility to focus on that 80% to 150% median income that we're not otherwise meeting. And so this seemed like an opportunity to say, we're at 11.9%, these units coming online is going to propel us somewhat higher than 11.9 if we do nothing else. And so that gives us a safety net, if you will, to create some of those units that otherwise the market's just totally ignoring.
David and then Jeff.
Wayne or someone perhaps can answer that. At the ice ponds, the units that were affordable, and granted this was now 3 or 4 years ago perhaps, what was the selling price? How did we define affordability for ice ponds?
I don't know the dollar amount. They were aimed at 80% of median income.
I think they were 189.
189 and 80% of median.
And then the other trade-off we did is the normal funding source required 30 years of affordability. We have a provision, as Keith said, where people ask for subdivision waivers, get by 99 years of affordability. So the units are mixed. Of the units, 2 are 99-year affordability, and the remaining units, they're at 30-year affordability.
What about the, so if, yeah.
I keep going back to what I would really like to comment about there needs to be a middle. We keep talking about sort of affordable and market rate, and those are increasingly getting to be really quite different groups price-wise, and we need to have a middle, and it comes back to the need for small but market rate housing. And I would rather see that be stipulated in that remaining 100 units, that we, you know, that 50% of that be small market rate. I don't know how to describe it, but, you know, 1,000 square foot, 1,200 square foot at most, things that were always going to be entry-level homes that will always provide a middle community up there.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Jack, I think was supposed to go.
Do we need to come to a decision
No,
about
this is to help to hear everybody's
Yeah.
ideas and to
So
try to think it
let
through.
me ask that question. I think just to say, you know, what should the sort of the affordability figure be? I agree with you, is not complex enough. You know, we need to ask, you know, do we want to have more rental in the other 100 or not, right? I mean, do we need more rental? Do we want to have permanently, or as permanently as they can be made, affordable? We want to have market rate affordable. I mean, these are all connected, but not exactly the same question.
Yeah.
In some communities, rather than starter homes, they call them workforce houses.
Yeah.
And what they try to do is look at your trash collectors, your teachers, your firefighters, your policemen, what is their income? And, you know, what could keep those people in the city? So I'm sure there's some methodology that we could look at for that particular market.
I remember, Dan, you telling me once that you didn't, in your restaurant, there was certain, years ago when there was a snowstorm, you could staff up even if there was a blizzard because people could walk to work, and then you couldn't do it anymore because they didn't live in Northampton anymore.
They live in Greenfield.
You know, so it's just like, who are those people that we need to be able to have live in our community? That's who I keep thinking about. Of these smaller homes, you know, the people who work in our community and who would like to live in it. Yeah.
Just even 300,000 seems.
I don't know if that's the number. I mean, I'm just saying that they were using a value number. I don't know.
Yeah.
I do know that that's the goal, is to try to get it under, but look at where the numbers are now, right? And the other, I think it's worth a conversation with the developer as the CAC about what they see as the workforce housing piece. You know, we're not the only community grappling with this. Easton, actually, I just looked at Easton's website. They're doing zoning that allows for what they call cottage housing, allows for the smaller housing, because they looked at the tax return on it and they looked at the cost, and it really closed the gap in terms of the market. So, and did Stephen leave? He's still there somewhere. Because I'm conscious of the concern around the tax return, the tax payback on housing, and I think what you're going to find in smaller housing is going to be a lot of single folks or people without children. It's not just going to be families with children. And they're going to pay taxes and not have kids in the schools. And that's when we ran the numbers to look at these different housing prototypes, that's what it looked like. When I look at my neighborhood, which is a lot of really small houses, there's not a lot of kids living in my neighborhood. So I think it helps balance what's going to happen in the larger units, which are going to be more kids. You know, those 2 3-bedroom houses, the 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom houses are going to have kids. The smaller units, I don't think are going to have as many children. I'm trying to get to your point, Steve.
Wait till I left the room.
I know.
You're not trying.
Now, what I'm just looking at, like, Ice Pond had 3 4-bedroom houses, right? That's where we have kids. The apartments, we don't have as many kids. And I look at my neighborhood in Laurel Park, the school bus picks up, out of 100 units, I think it picks up 12 to 15 kids.
This is the numbers right here. So new suburban areas, which would include Ice Pond, Plantations, all these projects, we're getting 3.39 people per dwelling unit, and 29% of them are kids who are educated. As opposed to most of the tax credit projects in town, where the population is half per unit, and we're only educating 5% of them. And downtown, where the population is less than 2, and we're only educating 5%. So we, these new suburban stuff, that's where we're losing money.
And just the push on the state level in terms of building closer to the suburban core, they're doing that partly because they don't want, you know, they're recognizing that there's savings in other areas, in police, fire, libraries, and so on. We still have DPW costs, I'll agree with you.
How many bedrooms in a bungalow? Does it vary, or?
I mean, you can, that's the conversation you can have with them. 1, 2, they've talked about doing unfinished second floors, people can build them out the way they want.
You know, the reality of the number of kids, particularly in rental units, is a function of the size of the units, of course. If you have 2-bedroom apartments, you're not going to have more than 2 kids in a household. If you have 1-bedroom apartments, you're unlikely to have any kids. On the housing side, size will also dictate the number of folks, though there are fewer restrictions. If there are no restrictions imposed by the government, so you might have 2 or 3 kids in a room.
If you have a Section 8 and you have a boy and a girl, they require you to have a 3-bedroom house.
That's right.
I mean, when they were growing up, it didn't matter who you were. All 5 of you were going in the same bedroom.
Yeah.
So, but, you know, the other point just to make is, I don't think there's going to be a lot of tax credits for us to do more affordable housing up there for a while. You know, we've sucked in a lot of state subsidy into that project. How much more are we going to be able to get? There's nothing out there, and so what are we going to be able to get? We've done really well up there in terms of getting state subsidy.
Can I just to go back to what George said, the 100 and, well, whatever number of units they're planning for the bungalows, they're going to go forward with those only if we permit or we agree to change the conceptual master plan to include more units. Is that true? You think that's true?
I think they're certainly not going to build them as below $300,000 units. When they choose to build bungalows that are more bells and whistles, what they need to do is get a better return on the units. Right. So it could still be the retiree with lots of money that they aim for.
So to answer the broader question for the marketplace, there's no answer unless we say yes. In other words, the answer to the marketplace is we don't know what we're going to build. We're still going to use 8,000 square foot lots, and we can put 3,000 square foot homes on them if we so choose. Or, you know what I mean? There is no real conceptual plan if we say no to any additional units above the 227.
That's right, because when we...
Am I getting, I mean, that's why I wish you asked development too. That was the picture I got from the last meeting.
Yeah, I think Carrie had asked that.
Yeah, and once we did the 40R overlay,
right,
the conceptual or the picture that we had was basically thrown out, and that's where we are now.
Well, actually what they said was, if we do build out the rest of the 40R, that's almost done, the 40R, right? The townhouses are what's left in the 40R?
No, there's more than that, because we have 100 units that haven't,
not in,
total units under construction,
not
122.
in the master plan, not in the 40R. In the master plan.
The 40R has to be expanded.
I see what you're saying.
If you did all Ford Crossing,
yeah,
that would, including these townhouses for this model, that would use up the current approval.
That's what I'm
But
saying.
mass development, on the one hand, they're a nonprofit and they're trying to do what makes sense here. On the other hand, they're like a developer in the sense that they need to pay back what they've poured in this. And they're going to think like any developer, you're not going to leave this land on the table. So if the CAC said, this is the end in terms of the number of units, they'd say, fine, that's what we do, but they're going to be doing these as estate lots, even more expensive units, because frankly, from a return standpoint, you get a lot more in those units.
I think it comes down to what kind of housing do we think we need. That's what I think it comes down to. If we give them permission to do more housing, do we want them to be thinking about a mix of workforce housing along with single-family homes, as opposed to, if we don't do it, they're going to go ahead with just some single-family homes.
And the issue of affordability would be considerably lessened.
I think so, because of that workforce housing base. Yeah, I think so. Plus, I think the density goes along with the plan that was adopted by the planning board and the city council. Yeah.
The other, if you go up there and you see what's taking place, it's very incomplete, actually. You know, I didn't really like the whole thing getting switched around, but having, now that we have developed it as we have, I think we need to have more units. It just doesn't make any sense at all up there if they just, I mean, they've got a few good-sized apartment houses and they won't be facing anything. It's just very odd.
Solving two problems at once and require the extra 100 units be in the 2 or 3 of those brick buildings that are presently albatrosses, useless. They could be rehabbed with a good bit of investment.
I think they actually are planning that.
As part of which?
Actually, well, the North Employees Home, they're planning on, they have that, they call it out as a artist live workspace.
Would that be under the present allocation of
No,
units?
no, they're talking about that as a part of this expansion. The coach house, they're leaving a marker on actually as community space, but I think if they could use it, they're willing to use it for whatever they can use it for.
It must be used for something.
And then the male attendance building, it's on the master plan as commercial. And then the plan is to reuse it as commercial.
Yeah, I know.
So I think they are doing that.
Yeah.
Have we exhausted this topic? Is there anything, is there anything we didn't say?
I'm exhausted.
You know, I guess what I'm hearing is not hearing anybody say, yes, we should stick with the 50-50. Is that correct? That people are comfortable with moving way off the 50-50. They'd like to see workforce housing. Is that fair to say? I'm not saying anybody pounding their fist no. I'm hearing yes on workforce housing. They'd like maybe to have some deed-restricted units in there, and we can have that conversation with the developer. But I didn't hear that as an absolute. That there's an understanding that the 15% DMH needs to be carried through on this phase 2, but with the same understanding as before, that it could be met off-site or on-site. Is that right?
Right.
Okay, and that...
What does that mean?
That if they wanted to, for instance, partner with Valley CDC on a project that they were doing, and a 20-unit building, and they did 4 of the units as DMH units, they could use, if the developer was willing to do that, that could count towards their 15%.
Are the Mary McColgan apartments?
I was wondering.
Do you have
They were not counted.
They weren't counted.
They weren't part of the, that was land that was separate apart from,
Yeah, it was.
from this
But you have
acquisition.
clients, you have clients.
We have clients there.
But those 4 units would come off the total. Like it would be 4, if those 4 units were off-site, they could still build 4 units
Right.
on site. It's not like
Right.
they disappear.
Right. They have to build 15. I mean, I guess it becomes a...
So it's their advantage to have them off-site.
Right.
House.
But it also may be to the client's advantage.
Oh,
to have it
definitely.
off-site, too. So, I mean, we even talked about other communities, right? At one point, Dave, that there are, some of these folks don't live, they might want to live in the community where they grow up. So that was the question too. Yeah, George?
Well, I just want to say, I think I heard the housing partnership say that this, and I'll say this may be one of our last chances in the city for the next 15 or 20 years to get affordable housing. I don't think developments that are coming to the planning board are going to extend that option for us. We haven't seen that lately. So I just want to add that to the mix also. Even though nobody wants to push forward the 50-50 ratio, this is the last bite of the affordable options that we'll get for a while.
I'm going to disagree with that. I'm going to disagree with that because Betsy mentioned that their housing partnership is doing a study right now. One of the things they're going to look at is what kind of vehicles can we start using to get more affordable housing in other places in the city, number 1. Number 2, I was just at the dedication of 8 units on School Street, which was 4 more than had been there. So there were people toiling in the vineyard to bring forward more units all the time. In terms of the huge chunk, that's true. But I think there's development going on all the time, and I don't want to say that we're not going to, that this is it. I mean, you know what happened for years when I started on the land trust 100 years ago? People said, oh, you know, we're going to wait for the state hospital to deal with affordable housing. And we all said, we have to stop saying that and just start developing affordable housing. And we have to continue to say that after we deal with the state hospital. You know? So I hear you, but I don't want us to get stuck on that state hospital mindset on either end of it.
I think the other consensus point that was in the discussion was development of however many new units are granted here doesn't relieve the prior obligation of the ratio.
That's correct. That's correct, right. And that the phasing and the development can't sidestep that.
Right.
That's right. Right, and
You were ticking off the things that we agreed on.
right, well, yeah, do you have
I
another
wanted
one?
to mention the mid-range between affordable and
Well, I think I was calling that workforce housing, that we agreed that we were interested in workforce housing, right? Starter homes, workforce housing, whatever term, market affordable.
That's more expensive than,
No, it's the mid-range, it's the,
what's the lower?
well,
Affordable?
Affordable.
well, there's subsidized affordable, and then there's what people call market rate affordable, which I think is kind of a oxymoron. So I was looking for another term, like workforce housing or starter. Is there anything else? Yeah.
I just think it would be helpful to clarify some of those terms. I mean, I just looked at workforce housing, that does imply some level of affordability. It says somewhere between 50 and 150% of the median income. I mean, I don't know whether people are going to make assumptions based on the term. Maybe Lynn, since you brought up the term workforce housing.
I mean, when I've heard it used, it's looking at your workforce in your city. What do those people afford to be able to keep them in the city? The teachers, the DPW workers.
So if we're using the term workforce housing, we just want to probably know whether we're using that to imply something relative to the salary of the workforce in the city. I think DHCD is working on parameters of how they define workforce housing. I don't think they've finalized it.
We had a conversation with the head of the HCD about project, and and she used that term to define small footprint housing, so I think they're thinking about that. Yes.
Is there a percentage of affordable housing that needs to be deed restricted?
The 50% is as permanent, we want that to be as permanent as we can make it.
So that would be deed restricted.
Well, as Wayne said, some of it's deed restricted for 99 years, some is deed restricted for 30 years.
Some form of
Some
deed,
sort of
it's
deed
not just
restriction.
that it's a small house.
And the tax credit units are,
I think they're 30 or
30. It's, I mean, there's no, with the tax credit system, they've managed to replicate the disparities from 20 years ago.
But the category of small house that, may or may not gain a value, that doesn't come under the affordable housing.
The way I stated it was that it sounded like there was a consensus that some sort of workforce housing made sense, and some of it may or may not be deed restricted, and that could be a conversation that we could have with the developer.
For township members and housing partnership members who've been around for a long time, I'm sure they're a long time. Just to remind you of a similar discussion we had in the same kind of area, which is when we did accessory apartments, we looked at models around the Commonwealth. Many communities in the Commonwealth require those units to be deed restricted to be affordable housing. But many of those communities are finding that they're not moving, it's too complicated, the paperwork is too cumbersome. So we said as a community, this goes back to 10% affordable housing, we don't need credit for these for 40B, we're not going to try to get credit. We think that a unit that's 900 square feet is by definition going to be, for lack of a better term, market rate affordable. So whatever you charge, you can't charge that much for this units. And we found, frankly, some of those units are really rich people's guest homes, and those clearly are not affordable. But the majority of those units are clearly much lower into the rental market.
That was number one on the agenda. We did leak into number two, which was the tax revenue generation city cost. Stephen's point's being taken. I just tried to do an apples to apples comparison. I didn't allocate the what I call the section of Schedule 19 costs. I just allocated that appropriation costs.
And that's school spending, so like,
I used it right. I used what we are, yeah. Fair point. But I also will say that I did have a conversation with DPW again. He assured me that he actually could take care of this for $20,000, which is the cost of an additional plow route. He says it's one plow route. So I said to him, would you rather have a crew? And he said yes.
good thing we always fully fund our plowing budget every year. We never go over that.
It's the only thing we do fully fund. Yeah.
There, I have to raise a kind of a counterpoint to your other issues about the fire department and police department. I know just recently with the building of the police station and also serving on the capital improvements, every year the police chief and the fire chief come in and they say, you know, their jobs are getting tougher, they need better trucks, faster trucks, bigger trucks. Mark my words, they'll point towards the state hospital and the growth there in 5 or 10 years, saying this is increased work, increased road for us to cover. So I think we just have to add that in the mix. We can't discount it, even though those current city chiefs have given you their word now.
The current sitting chiefs will always tell me they want faster, bigger, and better equipment. And they're going to do that whether or not we build this. Because there's going to be something built somewhere else that they're going to have to get to. We're on a replacement schedule for all of their vehicles. The one person who I think has a case to be made for more staff, whether or not we build this, is the police chief. That doesn't have to do with building this. That has to do with the size of the city and, quite frankly, all the subdivisions that have been permitted way far out. Those are the ones that really are more problematic for us. Not the ones that are within this mile radius of the police station. So we're on a replacement plan for all those vehicles anyway, and we're not going to buy more for this. Will there be more wear and tear? Fire truck lasts 18 to 20 years. You know, is it going to last 17 years? I don't know. The third thing on the agenda is the job creation. Terry just gave that to you. This is more for the CAC, but we thought we'd just give it out just so people have it, because there was some discussion about jobs yet.
Sorry, Claire, I know you skipped ahead, there was a commercial tax revenue protection.
Oh, sorry, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah.
Maybe Wayne or somebody could point out, because we know light industrial, a lot of that's going to be Cole Morgan, the developers already actually started working at it. But the office, mixed-use, retail space, and assisted living, we don't talk about those that much in terms of master plan. Can you show where you see 60,000 square feet of office?
This is assisted living.
Yeah.
These are offices and mixed use. So
that's the male attendant building where you start.
The male attendant building, these are 3 new buildings.
Plus one across the street.
Now, where is the developer in terms of building out those 3 or 4 buildings? Are those soon?
Market driven.
Completely market driven. So we have no idea when we might be seeing tax revenue for those buildings. Same thing with the retail space, mixed use.
Yeah, retail space is both market driven and obviously the more house and the more commercial, the more local demand there is. So it's unlikely that we'll leave across.
Have we seen any people expressing interest in doing development there?
Yes, not as much recently with the economy slowdown, but and also because we didn't have a lot of sites to offer that were available. And then Morgan came in, now they're taking a lot of the sites that were previously on the South Campus. So I think that once their density of employees are there, that's going to drive some of the retail and rent to support them and housing. And then we're continuing to market for the office uses, both in the region and outside the region.
But there's vacant office now in town, so it really is dependent on the economic cycle, I think.
Well, and then there's the, I think Claire, you mentioned the artist. Would it be a live work kind of artist, or would that be only studio?
No, live work.
It's intended to be live work because that's another commercial need that's in the city.
Right. And that's that one building
in the back
at the top, but not the, like the male attendance buildings, the other ones, those could not be live work.
In part, we wanted to preserve the buildings that were close to Route 66 for commercial development because we were losing so much of it on the South Campus. So we were trying to preserve that for commercial use to try to maintain that balance that we started out with.
I will say that the artist live work may be something that we'll try to figure out if we can get tax credits for. It's not currently eligible, but it would be very hard for artists to buy those market rate. So it's something we're sorting out.
Right. The reason I ask is so much of our conversations are about the residential aspect, so we very rarely have talked about
commercial side.
The commercial side.
So the job projection numbers are after the tax revenue numbers. We had,
Well, actually,
So I just wanted to mention that in the RFP, I think we had said 500 to 800 jobs in the original. Are you worried about that? This gets us pretty close to 800.
Well, that's part of my concern. I mean, the historical beginning, that 207 that Danny was talking about, had a ratio to the 446,000 square feet that's on the next previous page for the May, or the July of 1999, so that there was a ratio that in terms of trying to create this as a village and generate jobs, and I had always envisioned those as being new jobs, not retained jobs. And notwithstanding someone who fully endorsed the move of Cole Morgan up there, I would want to see the 735 adjusted by whatever we would hope to be able to generate for jobs in the former Cole Morgan site, to be able to get to a realistic ratio between that 500 and 800 projection versus what the 735 is going to be. So that I have that concern, because I always was committed to this village development, new jobs, balancing the commercial space, 207 housing versus 446,000 square feet. And now that we're down to 360 or whatever the number is, 361, and we're going up to 327 units of residential, I have a calculation problem with that in terms of meshing it. My other historical difficulty with this is that in the first blush, acknowledging that, I mean, I am not unrealistic. I may be naive, I may be silly, and immature, but I'm not unrealistic. And so, if I didn't, you would have, right, Rich?
That's in the notes, Grant?
No, that's an ally. Is the point of, having said, making space available to kind of keep that lockstep with the residential development versus the commercial development, grew into a market problem where filling it was the difficulty. And so I have a little bit of a cheerleading thing going on here, that if we do go to up to 100, that we have filled commercial space rather than conceptual commercial space. But the history was 207 versus 446 was, or 227 was my recollection of how that history played out. And so now with the increase in housing and the decrease in square footage, albeit market, I have some concerns, and I really would like to see the retained versus the new. Thank you.
Can I just make a point?
Yes.
Retained was in the RFP. We didn't say new jobs in the RFP. I believe we said retained.
Again, I don't remember. I'm happy
It's
to.
always been retained.
I'm just
new and retained jobs since I've been involved in this project. Also, I just want to go back to this, the square footage, and the job creation. And if you look at the tax revenue, actually the tax revenue from the reduced square footage in commercial because of the increase in property values is actually more than it was under the full build out in the original master plan. So we're getting more tax value, and we're getting a similar number of jobs under the estimated plan. So even though the square footage of commercial has gone down, and that is not due to Cole Morgan, that is due to the site can't handle the full build out that we had originally planned it for. So it still is, I think, meeting the original goals of
Again, I have a problem with that. That seems to me to be the Ray Charles corollary. God is love, love is blind, Ray Charles is blind, therefore Ray Charles is God. That we're getting the same revenue because property is inflated and appreciated. And so, I would have rather had the windfall of the appreciation play into the tax revenue more so than building up values to create the same dollars generated.
That's a fair point, but the reality is that the site couldn't handle as much as was drawn on the master plan when it first was drawn, when we had these first conversations. It didn't take into account the slopes on the hill, it didn't take into account the wetlands, it didn't take into account a lot of issues that we then had to deal with. I mean, it just didn't.
Well, don't confuse me with facts, my mind's made up. No, but seriously for a moment, I mean, the fact is they could have kept, buildings that were taller rather than flat.
And they marketed them for 2 years and nobody wanted them. I mean, that's the other concern I have about not saying you have to tie the residential to the commercial already being developed. Now you're into a chicken and egg problem. Nobody's going to want to open a store up there if nobody lives there. So you have to have something.
I have to reach a balance, absolutely.
I think the residential, to a certain extent, is going to have to lead. Cole Morgan is leading, and then you have some residential. You're going to be able to fill in that middle. I think that's where it's going to play.
My greatest concern is that that we're, we're not going to see the value of jobs in a replacement sense because Morgan is leaving a space on King Street that has gross limitations, whether it's the not Firestone, is it Goodyear, whoever's up front. Firestone. Whether it's the Firestone lease, whether it's the the plaza next to them, whether it's the change in zoning on highway business, did I say that? Whatever it may be, they're leaving a space that has more restrictions and has less value, and it's less likely that we're going to see the 250 jobs, especially 250 jobs at an average of $75,000 per year per job of income. It's very unlikely that we're going to see a replacement of those jobs. And so that's what, I'm like you, I remember creation of new jobs because I remember Mayor Ford and myself arguing at a CAC meeting, I can't believe we did, but we did, years ago, over 800 good-paying, long-term jobs. But we're not going to see that happen with the Morgan space on King Street unless we help.
That's a different discussion. That's a King Street discussion that we have to have.
I thought I'd just bring it up today because.
And the reality is, if we could have had, we could have had the vacancy on King Street and vacancies at the state hospital.
That's a good point. Well taken.
Do we have anything else on job creation?
Not really, but I was just thinking of the employees of Cohen Morgan, will they be interested in some of these workforce?
I'd be surprised if they were.
I mean, they're probably already living down here.
I wouldn't, over time, they're going to be able to afford more than those work for it. They get paid pretty well. Yeah. Alternate plans, do you want, we all got, I think everybody got emailed at least the house. Did the housing partnership folks get it too? The Notre Dame. Wayne is just going to run through some of the high points of this, and we can. Right. Well, we tried to get the numbers, so, and I'm not sure it's right, but yeah.
That may be in addition to the 327?
I think it might be, but I don't know for sure. I think so, because they were going from the plan, that Mass Development had. So that was 200, well, 207 plus 62, so 269, so they're adding.
130.
No, actually, they're using that on the spreadsheet. So this is, my understanding is this is over and above
the
Mass Development, but each, notice here, this is the edge of the project right here. So they're also the bigger canvas. So this is a church right here, for example, on the corner of Chapel and Laurel. Well, this was a mistake, I should have back, but.
So especially gotten rid of the Haskell building. I think it's tearing down Haskell building.
Right. So it's a much bigger number, much bigger area.
You want to just go through where
Why go through it?
Because
why waste everybody's time with it?
Well, because some citizens in the city of Northampton are interested in this. And
but is anybody here?
We're going to do it. It's going to take us 5 minutes.
Take a vote whether we want to do it.
I'm being the dictator, Charlie. We said we would look at it at this meeting, or next meeting.
We just did.
It won't take that
These are students, and what they bring is a big picture vision. I think if you think of this as being designing the campus, Charlie's absolutely right, it doesn't make sense. I mean, the project, they spent how many hundreds of thousands of dollars doing design assessment, which the students didn't. So these are all the things where the students' plans don't work. 4 sites where the slopes are too steep to allow this, a detention pond right where some homes are built, a church they're showing torn down, some wetlands with buildings in it, some incredible specimen trees being lost.
Is this your gloss on there?
On there, right. Okay. So from the standpoint of, is this a plan we want to replace Mass Development's plan? No, it doesn't make sense, and that would be unrealistic to expect from the students. So I'm not going to spend time on that, Charlie's right, but there are some take-home sort of bigger philosophical discussions that I just want to sort of go through and talk about. The first is, they're shown this concept of a large tract of open space, that's right, which, is something frankly the planning board often raises for developers and saying, can you squeeze down the footprint to create open space? And I'm going to editorialize a bit, but that's appealing in a normal site. This is the context map you've seen before. This is a site where we have a lot of preserved open space. What we don't necessarily have is a lot of tot lots and small neighborhood parks. So one of the discussions is, what kind of open space do you want? And that's a vision for all of you guys. But clearly they're saying a different kind of open space. The second issue is, again, a philosophical issue, which I can totally respect. This is the area of the churches. Again, they said the church, tearing down the church was a mistake, and they will, in some later rendering, put it back.
Well, it's more than just the church. It's
is.
It's Marie Frank's house, it's another house, and the church.
Right, and the part that makes sense from a planning standpoint.
Here's the church and here's the people.
The part that from a planning standpoint makes sense is to do a master plan for someday in the future. And so that part I understand, time changes. But the philosophical discussion again is, you could say your top goal is to knit the redevelopment state hospital in with the neighborhood. And that's sort of what they're trying to do, make it a seamless connected piece, so Harriet can say that she lives in Village Hill. The vision, I think,
will my sidewalks be concrete?
But the vision, I think, that the CAC, and to a lesser extent the planning board have said is, these are distinct different neighborhoods, and so we want to protect them from traffic. So for example, this plan would dramatically increase traffic on Laurel, whereas the plan the CAC has before it says, no, we're going to make part of Laurel one way to reduce it. So it's a philosophically valid point, and you all need to weigh in on what you think the answer should be. The other issue that I think, again, is absolutely beautiful from an urban standpoint, and is a different way that we've gone about, is these roads here are what's called single loaded. That is, for the most part, the road around the edge of the campus has homes only on one side. And that means you can drive down the street and see the views out to the open space. And in areas where you're along a waterfront or mountain range, or in an urban area where people may not want to leave roads, that's very desirable, and actually it's a great set of plans. Mass development's done it a different kind of way. They have, this is the Notre Dame thing, but mass development is more of the double loading and then has a trail right around the edge. And so again, sort of a vision for what you want. Likewise, the alleyways are sort of wonderful features to keep the roads more, grandiose. But the alleyways, like how the roads around the edge, consume more asphalt. I emailed them at some point and said, oh, well, we won't do asphalt, we do either gravel, which we don't allow, or we do cobblestone, which is extremely expensive. But again, it would be beautiful, but very expensive. So again,
We're talking about on-street parking though, too.
We're talking about on-street parking, at least in this city, our policy has been, we don't allow parking during snow emergencies. So there needs to be some way for parking to be.
Alan has a question.
Well, I actually have a comment. It seems to me the overlay in comparing these two plans, I spent many hours today studying them both, which is not true. You have to think about what you want to try to do. And what I've expressed here is the idea that you want to create a community, a village. And so one way to look at it is, think about it, you want to create a community village. So for example, what occurred to me is in the parklands, will a village with a mixed use get more use out of a series of pocket parks or one large park? I would tend to think the pocket parks might work better. But you see how you can take what you're trying to get to and then look at the two different plans, each element. So, the same idea with the alleyways. You may not want to do alleyways for the same reason.
Right, but one of the comments that I had is it felt like, I'm a strong advocate for alleyways, but it felt like they were a little forced here, that they felt like they needed to include them everywhere. I mean, if you notice on the current plan, there's an opportunity, because your townhouses along this road, which need a service area, they're in essence showing one alleyway behind these areas over here. And it fits in, sort of, you're going to have a service area anyway. so it works as an alleyway. I'd love it, frankly, as these projects, this area is fairly far along. I love it as these areas get further along, we put more of those kind of alleyways in, but not have a set of rules that say every building needs to also be surveyed.
But we've also made trade-offs because we've asked for walking trails and bike paths, right? I mean, that's been what we've been pushing.
Well, it's sort of interesting to me that the, their plan, as opposed to Arrow Street's plan, has a sort of a well-developed, and one thing that I think is lacking in the Arrow Street plan that they have answered is that the Arrow Street plan doesn't have, it's hard to find a center to the project any longer. We had it initially when we had the north and south campus sort of reflecting on each other, and that was the center where 66 and the main road into the campus met. But when we chose Cole Morgan, we lost that. And the new plan doesn't really have a good concept of any center unifying thing, while the Notre Dame project actually does have a road that works as a center force moving through the whole site, culminating in that sort of round circular overview.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, from a design standpoint, you're right. This would be a wonderful place for that kind of element. You know, and certainly that's something that we should be working with them as they go forward with plans. I think the challenge that they have to encounter with, which the Notre Dame students would ignore, is that the specimen trees are where the specimen trees are, and they're not where we'd like them to be. What we'd like to do is move these things and put them right there.
But it's interesting because Arrow Street sort of chose another method. Instead of finding a unifying center, they decided to use the perimeter as the binder, which is all of these greenways and walking paths. So it's sort of an opposite concept, actually.
Right.
Well, I just have to make the usual comment that in the eyes of designers, it's always July. How many of you were on your bikes yesterday enjoying our local greenways and so forth? Really, without an indoor community facility, this place is not a community. Period. No, that's.
I'm going to say to you, without a coffee house and without a place to buy a bagel, and a place to buy a
Community
newspaper,
facilities
it's not going to be.
take different forms,
Okay.
but without.
And so you have to
just
get
green
to a
space
certain
does not do
density
it.
so the guy who's going to sell the coffee can pay his bills. You know, and that, you know,
Yeah. That may be a perfect lead into this.
okay. Well, are we done on Notre Dame? Do people, Charlie, do you want to stand it now?
You want to stay on it now? Is that what you asked?
It didn't take very long.
I think the important thing is that we don't say it's either or, but there may be aspects of that, as Wayne suggested, that may be advantageous to the.
And concepts, general concepts, I think,
Yeah.
might be able to be embraced in some way or other.
Yeah, and I think Harry's right. I mean, thinking about sort of, is there another way to do a focal point there?
Okay, the last piece, and housing partnership folks can stay or not, depends on what they want to do, is sort of what are the paths, the one piece doesn't affect you to a certain extent, or what are the paths to permitting? So this is something that the CAC saw already. Yep. So the CAC has to approve, we're in the yellow box, has to approve any amendments to the master plan, and that historically has been the number of units and the uses, generally. And generally where the roads are, but I would say that in a kind of a macro way, not in the micro way. The planning board still has had oversight on that. Is there anything else on that, Wayne, that the CAC has had? Well, I was saying the uses. Right. Then NEPA is the next phase where they go in and say we've been approved for X number of vehicles or units and X number of commercial, and this is the way that's going to play out. They go to NEPA and get that permit, or revise that permit. If we wanted to create more 40R zoning up there, which is an option, it would then go to the city council.
You get money for that?
I think we did get the first round of money for that. So
You get more money.
we could get more money if we did 40R, right? And then people know what we're talking about here? If we agree to a certain kind of zoning overlay, the state pays us for each unit? A certain amount of money. Yep, a certain density, right. And then finally, it goes to the planning board for the various permits and permit amendments and special permits. Yeah.
I think one of the things that I guess we get confused is when we see these pictures, we think you guys are approving that. And that's where sometimes I think that comes to us. And somebody says, oh, that's the plan.
Yeah, that's the permit.
And that's not the case. You're approving a number of units.
Uses and the general concept of preserving the parks and the beach trees and that.
And what I mean by you, I mean the CAC.
That's correct, right.
That's,
From a legal standpoint, if I could, in essence, whatever extra public input the city gets in the process, because this used to be public property, the CAC represents that voice.
well, what happens though is that picture shows up in the Advocate, and people say, oh, the CAC just approved that.
Just, when it comes before the planning board, you have all the normal authorities you guys got to
Right.
the project.
Well, that's why sometimes things come to us and people think it's a done deal. You know, by the time it comes to the planning board, because everybody's seen that picture, people say, oh, okay, the planning board's going to approve or disapprove. Bungalows there, things up there, and that's not the case. Don't make the happen.
Don't even talk to people.
I can't talk to anybody, someone who's, but that's the thing, or that picture will be in the Gazette, that picture will be on, you know, and I think it's important for people to understand that the master plan is not the design.
The dilemma for the developer is in order for us to say, yeah, we're okay with more units, they have to show us some kind of picture. You know, I mean,
No, but they're in good faith, they're working from
Yeah,
that picture as best they can.
That's right.
I think it's
Because the
sometimes.
roads are laid.
Wait a minute.
Yeah. So that's what, my worry is, you all, the CAC is going to approve the master plan with a certain number of housing units, but, and a certain amount that's going to be affordable. But I think it's just important for everyone to know outside of the CAC and the planning board exactly what's being approved. So this is a nice little flow chart, but North Campus Amendment needs number of units versus affordable.
well, it means a couple of things. It means number of units, affordability, uses, and I think some of the general amenities.
By uses, what do you mean by uses?
Commercial, artisan work, and I think some of the general layout, we're saying that's, we agree with.
Can you guys approve zoning things like, I mean,
No.
because live work is a zoning issue, doesn't it become, is that area?
This
The
is,
visual plan and the master plan has to be compliant with what the zoning allows.
and it's a plan village zone, so it's very open as to what it could be.
I just want to make sure people, you know, what we feel sometimes in the planning board is that when you guys, the CAC, approve something, you're expecting us to sign up on that picture. And that's not typically what happens.
You have all the rights that you hold as a planning board.
Right, exactly.
Well, and your representative makes that point. And the key thing on the flow chart is that's an amendment, not a plan approved.
Right, and I guess that's where
There
is definitely some confusion, and maybe it's outside of this room, it's in the community, it's people who are seeing these things, who aren't coming to meetings for 10 years. There's some people in town who might not quite
Well,
get it.
there always will be, but that's part of the process.
Right.
But you guys, you know, we want to work hand in hand with you.
There's a
First and
member-
foremost.
There's a member of the planning board, of the planning
Oh
board.
no, every time we go to the planning board, we give him a hard time. Did you tell the CAC? I don't,
To further that, my concern isn't so much what the public thinks, it's what the developer thinks. In that they won't go through all these iterations and changes based on what the CAC wants or implies, and come to us expecting almost a rubber stamp and saying, when we say, no, that's not what we haven't seen these pictures yet, we don't, you know, that's not where we thought the plan was headed. They said, what do you mean? We've already reviewed this with the CAC, and they said it was fine. And I'm concerned that we're setting up for, with the Cole Morgan layout and this layout potentially, for a conflict that doesn't necessarily need to happen.
I think that's a fair point. I mean, but I guess I'd say it's a really good idea for people on the planning board who have concerns now about this layout.
Yeah, share.
There's concern, this project, that's part of the reason why we're doing this meeting.
Well, that's what, because we were concerned because we weren't involved in the process. We hear about drawings and we hear about the CAC approved a revised plan, but we've never seen a revised plan, and by the time we get the revised plan, it would almost seem like it's too far down the line to change.
I hear you.
Well, the key thing there is that the mayor and the other planners drive our process, so you're very well represented.
Well, you have a representative of the planning board on the CAC. That's the place where you represent.
Yeah, but Wayne and Terry also represent your priorities, and so the misconceptions will always occur, believe me, in the public's mind, because
like
they
I'm just concerned more about the developers, so that.
Well,
yeah,
right. Listen, you couldn't have a more sensitive developer than what you have. You know that no market rate developer would touch this. For 8 years, they tried to find a developer who would develop the property. Nobody would go near it. Thank God for the state.
But this has also been a moving target for us.
I understand
So when you hear from the developer that the CAC has passed on this iteration or this concept for the master plan, I mean, I missed a couple of meetings, came back and there was 100 more units on the table, and they weren't on the table in May and June. They were on the table in September. So this has been a moving target, and so I think that it's great actually that we're sitting here in this meeting together, so you understand that what we're dealing with is the same kind of. We're trying to give them direction.
Right.
We're trying to create a master plan that you can work with based on subdivision regulations and based on site plan review, and it's a moving target.
George, then David, then Jack, then Bruce.
So just a couple of specific things to make sure they're out on the table about what the planning board has discussed when we've seen these illustrative concepts. And one is the assisted living facility. We're not sure that that's the appropriate place for that fronting on the gateway to this village. The massing of Cole Morgan, that's there with the parking lot right up to the street more or less, and only very small commercial retail building. We spent a lot of time, I think we, the city and the CAC, having that approach to the village be a little bit more user-friendly, visual-friendly, a mixture of village mixed use, economy. Right now we not allow for that, but we're not, we may have a very large discussion with the developer about the siting of that very small commercial building right there, and also the assisted living facility. So those are just two things that we think should be open to discussing and not just because it's illustrated here be accepted as such.
What does that mean,
That-
what specifically are you looking for?
Well, I think, Terry, that's on the south campus. The way that small building is just right there in and of itself, we thought that there could be more of a stretch of those buildings that may or not, according to the market demands, be available now. But that was.
I think they're open to that.
Yep. Well, good.
They were open to that, but the other issue was the grade,
it's
wasn't
the grade that they come out
Well, the grade has always been there, and that was
I think they're
designed.
open to it if the market and the parking requirements allow for anything further. I think they're open to it.
Because I think we fought very hard and even had a lawsuit over those specific buildings. So
I think they're open to it. I think you can have that conversation.
Well, I think that's our,
I've asked them, Franny, and they said they weren't.
that's the confusion.
I think they're concerned about the slope. I quite frankly am concerned about the slope, especially with cars coming out. Nevertheless, I think they're open to the discussion. We can't control what's going to happen over the next 20 years. The question of can you develop down that slope, I think they're willing to say, yes, of course. If we could meet the slope constraints and the parking, yeah, they can.
But I think that's what's important about this is, I'm glad we're all in the same room, because we want to make sure that what's coming to us, we run the same process as we do on something coming from Hospital Hill, as we would for development off 66, or the development off North Street, wherever it's coming from.
Yeah.
But just because it comes from the CAC, doesn't mean it's just coming to us, so we say, oh yeah, that's fine, it came from the CAC.
Fair
And
point.
we may have a lot of changes, a lot of comments, a lot of feedback to the developer, be it Cole Morgan or Mass Development, from our side when it gets to us, which is after you guys have seen it.
I just, on the question of the building going down the hill, I think they're open to it.
Sure,
on the other.
and that's what we want to make sure you guys, when it comes to us, we may have that discussion, so what we may approve may not be what you guys saw or mass development pitched to you.
David was next.
To the concerns that Stephen and George and others on the planning board have mentioned, the CAC's traditionally had sort of like this one picture, this one concept that we've said, okay, this is our concept for the master plan. This represents all of those formulas, the 50% and the mix of affordable and commercial and all that stuff. Is it possible in considering a revision that you might approve kind of like a menu, not a menu, but you might approve multiple, not multiple plans, but we're approving this, we're approving a certain configuration of housing, of additional units, and these are various scenarios that it might look like. As opposed to, because again, then it becomes monolithic, and that's the whole issue of, you know, why are you putting bungalows here and this type of house here when they could mix it all around? When all of this is just a concept, when not, you know, all of, as we've seen, I mean, it's played out that way. When you look at the first plan moving forward, it's never worked out the way it's been drawn.
The only thing I would say to that is that that was true when it was the first plan, but as we've gotten to know the site better and better and better and better, it becomes more and more clear what the constraints are. And I mean, I just don't think we're at the same place that we were 15 years ago when Jerry Joseph drew it.
But I mean, even they've shown some iterations where there's co-housing,
right,
and then there's single-family housing, and they've shown iterations where there's bungalows in the middle, and there.
But I don't think that can. I mean, I guess I'd put that back to the planning board. Do you?
Yeah.
I mean, do you have to do? You know, if we say they go up to 100 houses, then they're going to come into them and lay out those houses in some way.
I guess what I'm saying is, are you reacting to, if this one photograph gets published somewhere, then they come to you and say, well, this is what the CAC approved, so, you know, why are you surprised that we're proposing this layout? And I'm saying, could we be more flexible, not more flexible, but less specific and have different sort of
I don't think we have to forward the drawing. I think we can forward, have the master plan revision be, could even be text for that matter.
That's why the drawing sometimes is the
Right.
And that may be helpful for it to be text.
The original master plan included it. I mean, it was actually 2 thick documents of text.
So I guess we just have to be, clear when we approve this, what we're approving. That we're approving the underlying numbers and the underlying concepts, but we're not in any way implying that that house has to be there and that bungalow has to be there, and those roads even have to be there. I mean, that's all your purview. So I hear what you're saying, but I don't think the CAC has ever thought that that's what we were sending you.
Except that we've played a role of being a public sounding board and have, for instance, managed to try to get public input on for the environmental impact report and the NEPA process. And to that extent, that we have had conversations about where roads are going to be because we've thought a lot about intersections and so on. So we've played some of that role there. I think that's been, and I hope it's been helpful to the planning board because we've talked about what kind of off-site improvements have to happen and negotiated those with neighbors and so on. So it's a little bit more than, and I think that's been helpful, right? So, yeah, Dave?
As a CAC member, I can say that I honestly expected that a whole nother process takes place at planning board, and that what we did here was a first cut vetting process, but that there were certain responsibilities that the planning board has that trumps any of the activity that we may provide, and that's, I've always proceeded on the assumption that something that, whatever we did at the CAC still had to meet whatever standard the planning board is setting. And it was never my assumption that whatever we said was to be readily expected to be approved or stamped by the planning board.
You should maybe make that clear to the developer when you make your motions.
Jack, Bruce, Harriet.
So this is a great conversation. It's a conversation we really need to be having. Wayne, can you take us back to the flow chart? So I'm just wondering if everybody is really clear. I don't want to take us till midnight here. You know, on what the planning board has already done, for instance, with the special permit, the site plan design guidelines. I know there are some people in the room who weren't around when that stuff was happening. Would it be useful to have a 2-minute?
I'm not, I mean, is it useful? Do we need to do that?
No.
No.
Okay. I just want to ask.
But I think what Jack's trying to add on, what he's trying to say is that in some ways, the zoning was created up there, the planned village zoning was created by the planning board, presumably, and the developer is working within that. Everything he's giving us and you is within those parameters. So it's not like we created the zoning.
It's actually been rewritten once, twice.
Did we approve the zoning?
The original master plan.
They ultimately, but it came through us and you.
And design guidelines, you had control over.
So the biggest change, I think, so far has been the design guidelines were adopted. This, the special permit and site plan for the South Campus was approved and vetted. And now those are somewhat moot because there's been a revision to the South Campus master plan that we weren't part of. So we're gonna have to go through that whole process again.
But if this was anybody, they could have done it.
I didn't understand what you were saying.
Somebody could buy a lot on King Street, come in, get a permit from you, and then come in a year later and say, I want to change it.
Yep.
Right?
I think that the underlying or overlying issue is that I think we're clear on the rules, but there's a perception, I think, by the developer that once they get approval here, then it's sort of like a given that we're going to give the exact same approval when it gets to the planning board. And
we'll make that clear.
I think that's a major issue from our standpoint. Is that
What evidence have you seen of this?
well, just comments in the planning board meetings.
Really?
Yeah.
Boy, we get just the opposite.
They're worried about the planning.
They're looking for direction to help in numbers to present to you.
Well, this is a great opportunity for feedback. I mean, I think the CAC has commandeered as much authority as it possibly could out of a relatively unclear statute initiative in trying to be a filter system for the process, the evolution, the theories. And I see the CAC being the theoretical component of this in terms of, okay, 100 units, how might it be constructed? But it's when the rubber meets the road, it's through the planning board. And if they ever tell you that the CAC said that this was right, that's never come out of this group. And Dan and I have been there from the beginning. And we're trying to be a participant in the process to get to the best possible application up there. And so as we kind of try to steer the original thinking, what goes on the ground has got to be from the planning board, and hearing all of your thoughts in your terms of your territorialness and your protections and your viewpoints, it's really reassuring for us too. And I don't think we've ever worked at cross purposes, and if it was a message that came through differently, check with your rep here and or call us before you act, as Claire will tell you. I mean, it's always been, here's what we think makes sense within the context of it. You guys put it into play, sort of thing. So
we did amend the master plan and add Cohen on the South Campus. Absolutely, we did that, and we did that because we thought it was the right thing to do. You still have planning oversight on that, and I don't think it is any different than any other developer saying we are changing use, and changing what somebody wants to do. You have oversight on that.
I just want to say I think it's a really good conversation and clearing of the air. Because the piece that you mentioned is the press. Because a lot of us heard, for example, that Cole Morgan was going to be there through reading about it in the Gazette. And I think sometimes, there is this lack of communication or clarity between the two entities that gets fed through public knowledge and through what you read in the paper. And then it seems like it's cast in stone. So to me, it is a really good conversation that loosens that up.
I think it is cast in stone that they're going there. They bought a piece of property. The question of what the building looks like and how it lays out in the parcel, you have input. But they bought the property. Didn't they buy it? They have a buy-sell property.
Well, I think when some of us on the planning board first heard about it was a conceptual idea that came out of the CAC that was written out in the Gazette as if this is happening before we knew of any
we have a structure that has a planning board rep on the board. I don't know, I mean, if people have ideas about how we can further communication beyond that.
Well, now.
On my defense, it came out in the paper before the next meeting.
Well, Claire, did we have to change the master plan for that?
Yeah,
Yes,
we did.
So yeah, we had to do that before it comes to you, no matter what. I mean,
There's a
we,
process, we're the intervening process.
Thing to do. Maybe George thought I should have voted against it, but I didn't.
Right, but
Whoa, let's keep it down.
I do want to say that at that
Let the
meeting,
beach hire
I
a
said to the
lawyer.
whole group,
No, it's
the
getting
whole group
late.
of the CAC, do you want to wait and take a vote on this in a couple of weeks? And the consensus was, no, let's vote on it tonight. I think we probably should have waited, but we didn't wait, so.
we should have waited, but we made a mistake, so.
I think the public hearings you've had recently have been great, and I know they're obnoxious to sit through, but they've been great. And unfortunately, right, 2020 hindsight, a public hearing on that Cole Morgan thing would have been nice.
We took public comment that night.
Did we?
Yeah, I
It
believe we
wasn't.
did.
We did take some.
Yeah, we did. So,
But we went ahead with the vote instead of, well, we probably should have waited and mulled it over.
but again, you're going to have a crack at it now.
And that's, and you know, to echo probably for the fifth time you've heard this, as long as Cole Morgan knows what you guys approve, still goes to us. That's the important.
They'll find out when they get to it.
They're in the process.
I think, can I just throw one other question in the pot, because I think there might be some confusion about, from different people's perspective, of what is site plan, what is the planning board, what is site plan approval, and what is the master plan approval, what is the conceptual design? And I think where there might be confusion is, you know, Cole Morgan has a purchase and sale agreement on the property that they think they need to accommodate their site and what they need in terms of building square footage and parking. And, you know, if the planning board is thinking that you're gonna mandate that they need to have buildings all along the frontage, I don't think that they're gonna be able to fit on the site along with that. So, and the question is that a site plan approval, or is that a master plan level change? I mean, it may be that, you know, 20 years down the road, when cars are not as necessary anymore, that there's certainly enough room to build down along the frontage, but, and there may be ways to screen the parking from the street currently, under the current needs for Cole Morgan. So I think that kind of gray area is where Cole Morgan, I think, mass development gets confused.
Well, and so I guess what we're saying, it comes down to, we want to make sure that we do our job when it comes to us, and that the expectation of both Cole Morgan and mass development, that they understand that there's, as this flow chart shows, the process is CSE has a certain role in the process. Planning board
That's
does.
6 now.
If I said 6, yeah, no, that's all. So Terry, the fact that Cole Morgan has a particular design, we're not going to sit here with you guys tonight and say, but we want to make sure that when it comes to us, we give it the same overview that.
Can I just make a point? That flow chart that you saw was in mass development's presentation. Okay, so they know. They know that. They put that flow chart in front of us, saying, we go to.
Well, we're saying to you guys is sometimes they come to us and the expectations, because you guys have signed off on it.
Like any good developer, they come to us and say, we're gonna get beat up by the planning board.
That's right.
Is there anything else?
Should be up.
All right, anything else? Somebody moves to adjourn? Somebody seconds, all in favor? Opposed? All right.